So obviously I'll be making forward-looking statements in this. It's on page 3. Ecuador has been talked about in the media as being the last frontier, and the reason for that is that in the gold and copper deposits that are aligned on the Andean chain, the Andean mountains, there is a gap over Ecuador. And I think with some of the discoveries that have been made in the last year to 18 months, people are beginning to realize that that probably isn't a gap. It's a gap simply because there wasn't the right sort of exploration done or whatever. And they're starting to see, right, this is a real opportunity, and the government is on side. So the reason that the project was staked by Aurania is a historic perspective that Keith Barron had, our CEO, that started in 2003. He was in Ecuador for other reasons, and he became absolutely fascinated and passionate about the 7 lost cities of the Spanish Empire that were all gold-producing areas. And one of them had just been refound in Ecuador in 1982, a place called Nambija. And he began to put documentation together, and he spent over a decade putting that documentation together that demonstrates more or less where 2 of these lost cities were located. And at the bottom of the second page, there's a bit of a timeline there. Keith got started this in 2003. 2006, he made the Fruta del Norte discovery, about 10 million ounces or so that's being developed at the moment. And that sort of took him off track, obviously, but then he subsequently got back onto the historical side of things. And, the bottom line is that in the mid-1500s, about 1564 or so, a town called Logroño was established. About a decade later, Sevilla de Oro was established, and Keith has found documentation in the Vatican and various libraries around the world of actually month-end reports on the amount of gold that was produced in these areas, and then subsequent to that, descriptions of how these places were reached. And that was on the basis of people who were working at those operations, but also other people, and telling their stories about what happened on their way to those so-called cities. I mean, they were basically wooden forts. And we were busy putting together all that information in a geographic format to define more or less where those areas are. Keith has a damn good idea of where they are. Based on the next page on this map from 1584, and that's just one of the pieces of evidence. Both Sevilla and Logroño, these 2 so-called lost cities, are located on a map that has Quito and Zamora on it. Those 2 cities still exist. And the important thing about this map is it shows that those 2 gold mining areas lay between the north-south river, and the only river in that orientation in Ecuador is, there's only one in that orientation, and it's on the west side of the last mountain range before the Amazon basin just goes for thousands of kilometers in front of you. So there's a lot of geographic context that made Keith basically take up about 200,000 hectares that is down in the southeastern part of Ecuador, illustrated on the next graphic. It's that yellow rectangle. And while all this historic work was going on, SolGold made their really, really amazing discovery, world-class discovery of a copper-gold porphyry in the northern part of the country. Codelco, the Chilean copper producer, is also in there on a joint venture. And Lundin Gold, critically, is developing the Fruta del Norte deposit and doing an incredible job of it from a social and environmental point of view, as well as the production side. The Ecuadorian government has come on side in a huge way. I think they're seeing a shift in future revenues from the oil industry to the mining industry, but responsible mining. And they're attracting a lot of interest. There are a lot of majors moving into Ecuador at the moment, and there are more as we speak arriving there. The Ecuadorian government is quite outspoken in saying that they have basically led the mining industry, and what they mean by that is they have put in $140 million worth of infrastructure in terms of schools, colleges, hospitals. The road network is absolutely outstanding in the province in which Landin is developing Fruta del Norte. So the government is absolutely forthright about the fact that they don't have a very good track record in that region. It's been a backwater for decades. And they are now putting in a huge amount of infrastructure. There's a lot of hydro going in, and so there's clean electricity coming out of that area as well. So the government has put in all this infrastructure and this investment before it's getting 1 cent back in royalties or taxes or anything else from the mining industry. Turning more to the actual project area on the top of on page 7, this red area is the boundary of this 200,000 hectares of concessions that was based on the historical data and knowing more or less where those historic mines are or were. But the critical thing is that from a geological perspective, the project area is absolutely along strike. It's a continuation of the Cordillera del Condor, which is in the south there. And so it's the same rocks, the same host rocks, and management has had a lot of success in the exploration in that contiguous area. Basically, we have found, working for other companies, about 20 billion pounds of copper, and the discovery of Fruta del Norte, which is about 10 million ounces. Basically, we're applying exactly the same exploration techniques to the northern area where Aurania's concessions are. These are techniques that led to the discoveries in the south. Same rocks, same people, same techniques. And basically, that's what the story is. In terms of the resources, the Cordillera del Condor has got about 27 million ounces worth of gold in it in resources and about 30 billion pounds of copper. The initial exploration work, we have done the interpretation of satellite data. We're starting to see pull-apart basins, and the importance of the pull-aparts, and it's illustrated on page 12, is that Fruta del Norte is in a pull-apart where basically the earth just cracked open along a couple of faults, and at Fruta del Norte that allowed the ingress of hot gold-bearing fluids that precipitated into an epithermal gold-silver deposit. We're seeing exactly that same geological pattern in this unexplored area to the north within Aurania's concession area, and there is gold being panned out of streams there. So we're starting to see the same geological pattern, and we already know that the geology is the same. On the next page, on page 13, all we can say about the geophysics is that the airborne mag and radiometric program is finishing literally within the next couple of days. There will be an announcement of that shortly, and the stream sediment sampling guys are in the field, and certainly the rocks that we're seeing there are pretty exciting in terms of what we've seen before within the Cordillera del Condor and associated with those discoveries down there. Capital structure is relatively tight, fully diluted, about 31 million shares, and the insiders, Keith has about 52% of the company, which obviously will be diluted as we go forward with financings, but insiders are about 61%. So the insiders are certainly committed on this project. So basically, in conclusion, same rocks, we're seeing the same structural systems in terms of the pull-apart basins. We're applying the same geological techniques, and they're being geological techniques that resulted in discoveries, and it's the same people that were involved in successful exploration in the southern area that are involved in the new concession area.